Hey guys, Matt here with Take Roads Less Traveled, and today we have an update on the Avalanche build. I know it's been a while since I've done a video on the Avalanche, and I apologize for that. It's had a lot of changes, and I'm hoping to catch up with all of those things to show you guys where it currently is at in the build process. And a couple of those are because one, I just didn't have time to edit the videos and shoot the video for it, and two, because a lot of times I just forgot to do it. So I actually have to go back and take some things off of the truck in order to do the videos and then put them back on the truck so you guys can see the changes and all that good stuff. But one of the things that we are looking at and that I just recently did is a gauge cluster swap. Now, this is a very easy thing to do. Part of this video will be a how-to, and you can see how the gauge cluster gets pulled out of those GMT 800s and put in your new ones. Now, this is the factory one that came in my Avalanche. As you can see, it is just a bare bones cluster. There's nothing fancy about this thing. You have right over here a little section up on this top corner for warning lights and everything. Right below it, you have a section of dummy lights specifically for your transmission. And then right next to it, you have your tach for knowing your engine speed. You have your speedometer. And then you have your 4 gauges right here for things such as your oil pressure, your battery voltage, your fuel level, and your engine temperature. Below the speedometer, you have the driver information center, which includes things such as what gear you're in, your odometer, and then you can cycle through based on the options on your truck, things such as your average fuel economy, your fuel range, all that good stuff. Tire pressures, you can go in and it allows you to set when your doors lock and what type of chime you have for your when you lock or unlock the truck, getting your light delay and all this kind of stuff is all in there. But this is just your standard GM gauge cluster in these GMT 800s. There's nothing fancy about it, and I hate it. It's something that just has always annoyed me about their trucks. They just don't look very nice. They're very, very bland. They're functional though. And the nice thing is that if this goes bad, you can find these in junkyards all over the place. But there are ways to upgrade them. And the first upgrade is with a Denali or a heavy duty gauge cluster. GM on their GMC variants had the Denali versions, and then you had the heavy duties such as the Silverado, the Sierra, and the Suburban even, where in this little corner where the dummy light is at for your transmission temperature, there is an actual gauge. This is something that is great to have, especially while overlanding, to where you know exactly what type of temperature your transmission is having to put up with. And if it gets too hot, this is great for while you're towing, all of those things. And that is a nice little upgrade to have on these. The problem is finding one of those. Not as many Denalis were made, and the heavy duties you don't find in junkyards very often. However, there is another option, and that is to go the Cadillac route. Yes, the Cadillac Escalade, or even the Escalade EXT, which is the Avalanche's Cadillac twin. Those not only have the temperature gauge, but they have a much nicer gauge cluster appearance overall. You guys can see it right now. It looks amazing. Yes, it has a little extra flash and bling to it with the chrome bezel surrounds, but overall the gauge displays look so much better. It looks much nicer, much classier, and is just more appealing overall visually. Now, something to recognize with these clusters is the connection type. It's very simple. All it is a plug in the back. However, GM, for whatever reason, decided to change that halfway through the GMT 800 series lineup. GMT 800s run from 1999 to 2006 and even into early 2007 with the Silverado Classics. But 99 to 02 had one type of electrical connection, whereas 03 to 06 and those early 07s had a very different type of connection. This is the later kind. So if you're wanting to change out your gauge cluster, you need to make sure that you are pulling a cluster from that correct time spread. If your vehicle, if your GMT 800 is a 99 to 02. You can use a gauge cluster from any 99 to 02 vehicle in that same lineup, whether that be the Sierra, the Silverado, the Tahoe, the Yukon XL, the Suburban, Cadillac Escalade, and the Chevy Avalanche for 02. And the EXT, I believe, might have been in 02. I don't remember if they came out in 02 or 03, but check on that first. However, if you have an 03 to 06 / early 07 Silverado Classic, then you need to pull from that year span, those 03s to 06 / very early 07. The biggest thing there is you cannot use an actual 2007 gauge cluster out of a GMT 900 in a GMT 800. It just does not work. You can't do that. So I'm excited. We're going to take a look and see the process I had to go through because I wanted one. And this was an upgrade I wanted to do for a while, about 8 months actually. I've owned my truck for just over a year now. And for 8 months, I've been wanting to do this swap, and there were two things that took me 8 months to do it. One was finding a Cadillac Escalade gauge cluster. They are not the easiest things to find unless you try to do it online. And if you do it online, you pay a whole lot more money. I didn't want to do that. I am on a budget. I like to keep things as low cost as possible while still getting a good quality product. And that meant I wasn't going to shell out the 100 to 150 or even more for a used cluster that hadn't even been programmed yet or even rebuilt. So that left me with doing junkyards or Facebook Marketplace or even Craigslist. Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist, everyone was still wanting about $100 for a cluster out of a vehicle they were parting out. And again, that was just too much for me, especially considering that getting it rebuilt and reprogrammed to show the correct mileage and engine hours for my truck was going to run me probably another $150 or even more. I didn't want to spend, $250 on a gauge cluster in the end. So that left me with a junkyard. Most junkyards, you're going to find them priced at about $40 for a cluster that's in good working order. And around me in Southeast Virginia, this wasn't happening. Anytime there was a heavy duty or Denali in the yard, it immediately got picked over before I could even get to it, and the clusters were gone. Much less even finding an Escalade or an Escalade EXT in the yards. Haven't even seen one at all in all the years that I've lived here. So what was I to do but either spend more money than I wanted to or continue to wait and look? Well, thankfully, just a couple weeks ago, I made a trip up to my mom's house, which is outside of Richmond, to go visit her. And just a few miles from where she lives is a wonderful, wonderful pick and pull place. And it is actually the biggest junkyard I have ever seen. And for some of you, it may seem small, but for me, the place was huge. And thankfully, they had 6 Escalades in their yard, ranging from 2002 to 2006. I knew I couldn't use the 2002 that they had, so that left me with the 5 other options of the 03s to 06s that they had in the yard. Trekking through the yard, I stumbled across one, looked inside, and the cluster was not there. Found a second one, and it was the same story. The cluster still was not there. Got to a third one, and the cluster was still not there. I was beginning to become disheartened and wondering, am I actually wasting my time looking through these Escalades? Am I going to find a gauge cluster or not? And lo and behold, upon the 4th Escalade, there it was, the gauge cluster. I had found it. I was happy. I was able to walk out of the yard after $40 with what I wanted, and then sent it off to Randy at Tachtronics in California. Randy is a great guy. He does quality work. He's been rebuilding the GM clusters for years, and he gave me the best price I got from anybody on rebuilding my cluster. I wanted to do LEDs, but I'm OCD, and I did not want my gauge cluster to have this really nice fancy LED look, and the rest of my dash lights to just have the factory fluorescence. So I just asked him to simply rebuild it with the factory fluorescence. He went through, cleaned everything up, put new lighting in and everything, rebuilt the whole cluster for me, and reprogrammed my odometer and the engine hours to accurately reflect my Avalanche's engine miles of 100, or body mileage and engine mileage of 189,000 $635 or 37, somewhere in there, instead of the $243,000 that were on that cluster that I pulled from the Escalade, and to reflect the same engine hours of the 5,300 some odd engine hours I have on the vehicle. So, huge shout out to Randy at Tachtronics. If you ever need a GM gauge cluster rebuilt, he's the man to go to. So, it's all very well, all very simple, and you guys get to see how this is done. It is a very worthwhile wait for me to have a cluster that I think looks stunningly much better than this one right here. So guys, that's just one small update on the Avalanche build, in which you can save a lot of money. Total cost to me was under, get this, under $160. Total cost for me to get this cluster swapped out. That's what I would have paid for just the cluster on Craigslist or Facebook Marketplace without the rebuild. So Randy, again, thank you so much for what you did for me there and helping me get my Avalanche where I want it to be. Guys, till next time, remember, always take the roads less traveled.